This is Channel 253. Beep, boop, boop, boop.
On this episode of the Grit and Grain Podcast.
Women primarily were the brewsters, the people that brewed the beer. And originally it was nuns in the Western world, and then it became secular with the alewives. And you all know the song. You must know the song, I'll be no more a nun, nun, nun. I'll be no more a nun, but I'll be a wife and lead a married life and brew good ale by the ton, ton, ton.
Amen.
It used to be my ringtone.
Yeah, that.
Welcome to the Grit and Grain Podcast, where we explore and celebrate the craft beer industry, community, and history in Tacoma, Washington, and surrounding Pacific Northwest areas. Thank you so much for hanging out. Let's get to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Grit and Grain Podcast, coming to you guys from the historic Parkway Tavern in Tacoma, Washington. My name is Matt McLaren, here, of course, with Ron Swarner.
Hello, I missed you this week.
Yeah, it's been crazy this whole week. We haven't seen each other.
I know.
Hope it was swell.
That's great.
And then Sean Jackson.
Hello, everyone.
How's it going, dude?
Great. I thought I would dress up again.
He's wearing the same tie.
I know.
Hey, the tie thing's working. Why not keep it rolling?
You have to change for pictures later. We all should have brought like another T-shirt. Just
And a second pair of underwear.
Yep.
Christ.
The first
Thanks,
episode was
Ron.
amazing.
Thought it would have been Sean.
I would have too.
Obviously, if you can't tell, we're still sitting here doing a part two with our wonderful guest, Charles Finkel from Pike Brewing, and from all of the other things we learned about in episode one, man.
Yeah. All of the any beer you've ever drank.
Yeah.
That was good.
Pretty much. Yeah. So yeah, if you haven't listened, please do go back. If you missed that one, it's wonderful. And Charles, thanks for sticking around.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Thanks for me being here.
So this episode is going to be, Sean's going to take the lead because we're going to talk about barley wine.
Yeah.
Hope that's all right.
So it's...
Wait, before we do though, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking Mountains Out, Washington State IPA from Pike Brewery.
Yeah.
But I think we're all
And
drinking.
and I also have Old Body Barley Wine.
Yeah, it's the one.
And this is what year?
2013.
2013.
Which we all have.
Yeah.
But
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers to this.
Cheers.
My goodness. So yeah, Ron and I are just going to
Oh
sit
my
back
God,
and
this is
drink this
like-
barley wine. Yeah. And learn.
Well,
That's good.
yeah, and it though, it really did lay down nicely. A decade old.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Amen. So yeah, currently it is Barley Wine Week here at the Parkway Tavern, which by the time you hear this, it will not be Barley Wine Week. So sorry, suckers. Better luck next year. And barley wine to me is, Charles mentioned it in episode 1, and that is my bread right there. It's my desert island beer. It's a near and dear place to my heart, and almost a religion of its own. And so I thought I would take a moment and read from a book called Barley Wine, which I like to call the good book.
We brought glasses. Outfit complete.
And, in addition to barley wine, one of the things is
I got it.
you've had quite a collection of talented brewers walk through your doors and collaborate with you and create wonderful, wonderful beers. And this particular book was written by the Reverends Cantwell and Allen. And I would like to read a passage from the book. As the introduction goes, in my most sincere radio voice. Okay. Back when we worked together at what was then called the Pike Place Brewery, the day we brewed our barley wine was always a special occasion. Even though it was early fall, we would play Christmas music as we brewed, in allusion to the fact that the beer would not be released until the holiday season was in full swing. It was the only day of the year that we used the lightly peated Scottish distiller's malt from Crisp Malting in England in place of our usual Maris Otter, invariably heaping it above the rim of our tiny mash tun and unleashing a smoky redolence that gave the normally rich smells of brewing a whiskyish note. There was also something less tangible in the air. From the first mash in until the last tipping of the hop back to get the final precious quart or two of wort, there was a sense of extra vigilance throughout the brewery, as each of us made absolutely certain that we got the most of every stage in the brew. It was a day of personal sacrifice, as buses were missed and phone calls made in order that runoff and boil times could be extended in the pursuit of our desired massive starting gravity. And once the beer was in fermentation, each of us would check it daily, nervously monitoring the incremental drops in gravity as we tasted it for signs of greatness. Because of the extra care taken in the crafting, as well as the extra amounts of both raw materials used and alcohol produced in the course of fermentation, barley wines are beers to make one sit up and take notice. They are beers that both brewers and consumers take seriously and which require serious attention to detail. But lest it seem that we mean to intimidate, let us be clear that they can be made by mortals of limited means and resources and made well. We ought to know the brewing system on which in those days we brewed Old Body, the Pike barley wine, was small, overworked, and cobbled together, but we had excellent raw materials, a wonderful yeast, and a great spirit of cooperation. And all the children said amen.
Oh my God. I'm going to cry.
I love, like, these were your people, and it's such an important beer style to me. And for me to sit in this room and have a 10-year-old Old Body in front of me and to be able to clink glasses with you is kind of a religious experience of its own.
Cheers.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Seriously, it's a big deal to me.
Good. I'm delighted that you like it, and I'm glad to hear from. I have that book at home, but I haven't read it for a while. And those two people, Fal Allen and Dick Cantwell, continue to be good friends of mine to this very day. Mm-hmm. And that's been 33 years ago, 34 years ago. When was that book published?
I believe 94, because there's an Old Body recipe.
Yeah, so almost 30 years since the book's been published, but they made the barley wine a couple of years before that.
Recipe published in here was from 94, copyrights 98.
I see.
Yep.
Yeah. So, barley wine has a infamous history in that Pliny the Elder went to what he called Germania in the, I think, 11 or 1200s, and he said that they made wine out of barley. And so he called it barley wine. And any strong, high-gravity beer has been barley wine since that time. But at the time we started, Fritz Maytag made Old Foghorn barley wine in San Francisco. And at the time, barley wine was very stylish. It since has lost its allure, but seems to be getting it back again now, as cyclically beers and other foods and beverages do. And but at the time, everyone that made a barley wine kind of had a funny joke about it. It was Old Foghorn, Old Body, and a number of other names. That it was also an English style that was pretty popular in English pubs, though it was quite high gravity. And they taxed British beers based on the gravity, so it was quite expensive. Not everyone drank barley wine, also quite strong. So this is in the neighborhood of about 10% alcohol, which is quite strong for a beer. But we brewed it every year, and we used to have before COVID, we had vertical tastings of Old Body, so you could taste 10 different vintages of it, and that's a lot of fun to compare it because beers do age, contrary to popular notion that the best beer is just the youngest, freshest one. It's just not true.
That's it. I was going to ask you about that. So Garrett Oliver wrote in the Brewmaster's Table that Ken Grossman gave him a hard time for trying to assess Bigfoot when it was fresh, and he said, "You got to give that beer 2 years before you tell me anything about it." What do you like? What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like
I don't disagree with that at all. I think that that this beer definitely melds together. The different components of the beer meld together to form a more harmonious beer after 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And this beer is still delicious, even though it's 10 years old.
Yes. Amen. You brought up it. I wasn't really thinking about it, but you brought up the taxation on alcohol by volume. Do you have any insight on how that taxation changed beer styles and where they are imported to?
Well, by the time I got in the beer business, there weren't many barley wines still produced in England because people were not drinking beers that were as expensive as a barley wine was normally. So there were a few, but Coin Spring, I think, is a very famous barley wine from England that's sort of legendary. There were a few, but most brewers that had made barley wine, you could get it in some pubs, and mostly people got it because they want a higher alcohol, sort of the equivalent of going to a wine bar and having white port or muscatel. But hopefully it wasn't quite that way. But no, and we didn't have that in America. So certain states had restrictions on how much alcohol you could have. Yeah. But I don't think any of them had the cost of the taxation on it based on the alcohol as it was, or the gravity as it was in England. I'm happy to report. We had plenty of perverse laws in America. I shouldn't say had. We continue to have.
Amen.
And the grit and grain is born.
It has gotten a lot better over the years. And I even heard something nice about the Washington State Liquor Control Board the other day.
It's not a joke. He's being serious. They're our favorite people. Better than the health department. Love them. The best. Absolute best.
Well, we had one lieutenant, I don't know if was her title, that caught me behind. She was hiding behind a potted palm in Frederick and Nelson as I was serving samples of beers. I remember how rank as it was. There was these two mothers talking about, they had little babies with them. One had a bow glued to its head. And and these two mothers were talking about nursing their babies. And at the same time, this lady was sitting behind a potted palm. Oh, sorry, just a minute. Sitting behind a potted palm and said, "I caught you. What did I do? You poured beer, and Frederick and Nelson's supposed to do that, and you're going to get a big fine." And she ruined my weekend, but but I wasn't fined.
Did you throw a bunch of frangos at her?
She was a really lovely person, in spite of the fact that she had previously been a warden in a women's prison. That's no joke. And what is a joke was her name, Joy. Joy, you're not here, are you?
She normally comes on Wednesdays.
But I mean, you could call a lot of these Belgian, even the Trappist beers, barley wine if you wanted to. They're one universality of most Trappist beers. They're not all Belgium now. There's one in New York. There's some in Italy, and one in Holland. Is that they're strong, so you could call them barley wines. A lot of them. Yeah, but they don't. They call them Trappist beers instead. Chimay and Roquefort and Westmalle. Orval is the lowest in alcohol of those. Orval is 7% alcohol.
That's why they were so uptight about your picture.
Yeah. Well, I had the dubious distinction of taking a group of 25 salespeople to Orval to spend the night once, and we slept in these cells, they called them appropriately, and the only decoration of my room was a big crucifix over my bed, and it was everything I could do to dissuade these salespeople who are inclined to tell dirty jokes now and again for doing exactly that. And the monk said, well, you know, we get up at 4:30 in the morning to do Vespers, so please keep it down. And we did. They did a pretty good job.
If only you had a bunch of plastic goats you could hang.
Yeah.
Kind of spruce up the room a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good idea, but I wouldn't have done that on a bet.
Man, I wish you and I were friends. I just feel like there's a really Starsky Hutch yin yang thing that would have. I think it really would have worked for everyone's benefit.
But I do love their beer. Orval is a wonderful beer.
Certainly
Yeah.
is.
I thought you were going to ask me which beer is my favorite. You didn't ask that, right?
It's
Which
still
beer
coming.
is your favorite?
Well, I would have to.
On behalf of my client, he refuses to answer that question.
We keep asking people, and they keep refusing to answer.
I'd put Orval right up there. That's a very good beer.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's unlike the other Trappist beers, it's a little lower in alcohol, and unlike the other Trappist beers that tend to be in the neighborhood of 14 to 16 bitterness units, Orval is in the neighborhood of 50, 60 bitterness units. So it's quite hoppy. You could call it an IPA, and it has because they call everything else an IPA. I don't mean the Belgian, but the Americans. And
Shots fired again.
it also has really nice flavor because while it has some propagated yeast, it also has some ambient spontaneous yeast that gives it the character that it has. And it also, speaking of aging, it ages really well. So I have in my cellar at home some 20-year-old Orval that, and they put the date on there so that if you want to, you can lay it away and drink it years later. Cool bottle. Yeah, cool bottle.
That's true, too.
Art Deco bottle designed by the architect that did the monastery. The monastery dates from 1070, but it was torn down twice during the French Revolution and then rebuilt in the 1920s in an Art Deco style.
Wow.
Charles, how could we convince you to start writing some of our episodes?
One downside to Orval, the old bar fight, break the bottle to cut someone. Ain't happening. You just look like an idiot. You're just banging the bottle on the bar. Bang, bang.
So it's a pretty tough bottle.
It's very tough.
I stopped doing that years ago.
When he graduated from
here
wine to beer.
Bring the data and the research. That's kind of what I do. Here's a stupid thing. Sean, have you done it?
Probably.
Probably. Boy, you know a lot of incredible people. Who are some of your favorite super beer friends?
Well, I probably should start with, he's no longer around, Michael Jackson. I'd mentioned Michael earlier. When I read this World Guide to Beer, as I said, it was published in 1977. For the first time, it became the biggest selling beer book in history. And also, I would say, among the best beer books in history. I called London Information. There was such a thing at that time. You have Michael Jackson, and there were no fewer than 50 Michael Jacksons in London, but somehow we found the right Michael Jackson. And I called and I introduced myself and told him I was the agent for the U.S. for Samuel Smith Brewery. in Yorkshire, and he informed me, which I didn't know from reading the book, that he grew up in Huddersfield in Yorkshire, and that was his local. And he was so impressed that someone in America would represent Samuel Smith Old Brewery when he said it wasn't even available outside of Yorkshire in England. Ultimately, it became available in London because they bought a bunch of pubs in London. And so Michael Jackson became a great friend, came to Seattle, stayed at our house a number of times. We visited him and his family in London. And he was here for 2006 for the Craft Brewers Conference in Seattle.
That's right.
And then he died in 2008 from complications from Parkinson's. So I would say he's my proudest beer friend, but also Garrett Oliver, you mentioned, wrote The Brewer's Table. Garrett's an old friend. I've known him forever. Charlie Papazian. Charlie started the Association of Brewers and the American Homebrewers Association in '78, the same year that I started Merchant of Anne. So I've been honored by his association, and he was my house guest just a few months ago. Matt was at, this is Matt Beach, by the way. He's our sales manager. Matt came to our house, and a bunch of people from, not only from Pike, but from Chuckanut, Pike, and other breweries to visit Charlie and his family. Randy Mosier, he's author in Chicago, and I've known him for a long time. I published his first book, The Brewer's Companion, and
You published that?
I published it, yeah. Ale Finalia publication, that was what we called it.
Ale Finalia.
And a bunch of brewers in Europe, in England. Roger Probst, who's the most famous beer writer in England, he's a friend. And tons of other ones.
Didn't you have a beer column with Charlie?
Yeah, I had a beer column with Charlie, Michael Jackson, I'm trying to think of the other, Garrett Oliver, and I wrote for All About Beer for years and years.
Yeah.
And that publication, which was the preeminent beer publication in America, lasted for quite a long time. I must have written for that publication for 20 years. It went out of business a few years ago based on malfeasance on the part of a new owner. It was originally owned by the Bradfords. And just recently, I did a podcast with John Hall, who is a writer in Chicago.
Yeah.
And it was, he was also the editor of All About Beer. And he purchased, within the last year or so, All About Beer. And it's now an online publication, but no longer a print publication. Yeah. So I was well known for pairing beers with a bunch of different food. And it was really exciting because every month I'd get 4 different beers. They all started out being light pale ales, and they all ended up being all IPAs. And but it was fun to pair them. I'm exaggerating on that. It was fun.
The fact that we all couldn't tell is the problem.
Yeah. It was fun to pair them with both. My wife and I like to cook, and it was fun to pair them with a lot of different foods, which we did over a period of time.
Can I ask you a foodie question?
Yes, please.
We're talking about barley wine. What's your number one pairing for a good barley wine?
With barley wine, I would say after dinner with cheese and nuts, cheese and fruit, dried fruit, for example, would be really good. Like a fig, and I make a fig and date cake to go with cheese. And
see more things like that.
Dense dessert. The secret, if you're going to do that, is cognac.
Charles, can I get your number? Or like,
If you say more things like that, I'm going to have to clean up a mess. So it's,
you're really going to need a new tie.
Everyone be cool.
But just like those strong Belgian beers, in Belgium they don't drink those with food very much. Mm-hmm. They're consumed as a digestive or an aperitif, but not as a drink to go with food. They drink wine with food normally. But I think beer and food go really well together, but more this mountains out than Old Body.
What's the most unexpected, successful food pairing that people wouldn't try, or that you don't think people might try?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I can tell you the most unexpected beer I've had is Chanterelle beer made by Randy Mosier. So Randy started out as a home brewer before he became an author. And he's an esoteric guy that's really interested and knowledgeable about a number of different subjects, beer being chief among them. But his Chanterelle beer was the best beer I've ever tasted. So I would say Chanterelle beer with chanterelles would be.
Holy cow.
Though I don't
I've got a new white whale now.
But going to Weinsteffen once, and which is the University of Beer and Agricultural University of Beer in Bavaria, and whereas if you went to the University of Washington, you have coffee and donuts at 10 in the morning. At Weinsteffen, you have Weiss beer and Weiss Wurst with really good mustard at 10 in the morning. That was fun. That was an unexpected pleasure.
I, have to mention it for Phaedra's sake, but as far as food pairing goes, too, Choco Fest was incredible.
Yeah, thank you.
When I went the first time, I had a different impression as far as like, I was very beer fest oriented and like all the different beers, but really it was a flavor experience. Like the things that were available there to pair together was, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Like I would have had to follow Matt around with a mop.
And Matt, to answer your question, I would say beer and chocolate would be a good combination. You wouldn't necessarily expect that to go well
completely
together,
agree
but it
with
does.
that.
And the conventional wisdom says that Cabernet Sauvignon and chocolate are a great combination. But in my view, wine has too much acidity to go with chocolate. And in fact, further to that, wine has too much acidity to go with a lot of foods. So foods particularly that are a little bit spicy, like Thai or Mexican or Szechuan food, I think go much better with beer than they go with wine. And though I go to a lot of ethnic restaurants, they've got a good wine list, but they've got a poor selection of beer. It doesn't make sense. That's getting better. I mean, good Mexican restaurants now have craft beers. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to report. One downside is that a lot of these ethnic restaurants are reliant on Anheuser-Busch to supply them their Budweiser. So the Budweiser, we don't have a Budweiser distributor in the house, do we? Budweiser has Qingdao. So every Chinese restaurant has Budweiser, the craft beer that I won't mention them, that Anheuser-Busch has, and Budweiser. And every Thai restaurant has Singha, which is distributed by Anheuser-Busch, and whatever other brands they have. And every Mexican restaurant has Corona and Modelo and Pacifica, all of which they own, and Budweiser. And so they've got the ethnic restaurant business covered, and it's tough for an independent brewer to get in there as a result of that.
It's true.
I think we need a more strong arm approach.
I just want to bring Charles on sales calls with me now.
Yeah.
It was much more concise than I ever could have conveyed that.
The brewery that shall not be named. I like that.
Stick around and you might learn more about it. We're going to take a super quick break, but we'll be right back. Thank you guys so much for hanging out during the break. As always, a quick shout out to Doug Mackey, our wonderful producer.
Whoa! Yeah, Doug.
Drinking barley wine.
And yeah, we're drinking barley wine. More barley wine.
Not barley wine. You were not, yeah.
Who's? Oh, he's not. Are you? Oh, Doug did have barley wine.
All right.
Yeah.
Now we all.
There's so many beers.
I have varietal barley wine.
Everyone drinks the Kool-Aid on Kool-Aid Week. If you're nasty.
I know we were talking a ton about barley wine, but
Yeah.
there's just 100 questions that we might just like fire through in the next few minutes. But we were just talking about your women in beer events,
Right.
Yeah.
So your readers or listeners rather are probably aware that long before men brewed beer, Brewsters, or women brewed beer. And from Mesopotamian times until the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, women primarily were the Brewsters, the people that brewed the beer. And originally it was nuns in the Western world, and then it became secular with the alewives. And you all know the song. You must know the song, I'll be no more a nun, nun, nun. I'll be no more a nun, but I'll be a wife and lead a married life and brew good ale by the ton, ton, ton.
Amen.
It used to be my ringtone.
Yeah, that shows the transition between nuns brewing the beer and secular people they called alewives brewing beer in the Middle Ages. So we reverted back to the Middle Ages at Pike, and now we have two women that are in charge of our brewing. Some
exceptionally skilled women.
They're doing a really fine job brewing our beer. And I'm very proud to report that we have created the Roseanne Finkel, that's my wife, my deceased wife's name, Roseanne Finkel Beer Scholarship Program. And it's
here again.
So we're honoring Roseanne at our Women in Beer event. We've done Women in Beer in the past. We've donated the proceeds to Planned Parenthood, to other organizations.
Yeah.
But this year will be through this scholarship to encourage women to brew beer. And having two women brewers is really nice. So we have this big event planned in May 22nd. I think that's the right date, but please check.
Please check with your internet providers and all your social medias
to find that. And it's
the books of faces.
Not only going to be Pike beer, but all different breweries that have women that are associated, like Mari Kemper, Pachucanut, she'll be there, and lots of other breweries and restaurants and food providers that are somehow associated with women, or women are associated with them. So, and that's a big event at Pike, so I urge everyone to come and join the fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Charles, how's the Ballard Pub doing?
The Ballard Pub is doing fine. We opened a pub on Ballard Avenue, which is my favorite street in Seattle. It's like turning the clock back 150 years down on Ballard Avenue. The only thing is, during COVID, they put all these kiosks out on the street. And in my view, no pun intended, it ruined the view that you have of these beautiful buildings. So hopefully they're going to revise that a little bit. But ours is right at the south end of Ballard Avenue, and you're all invited.
Oh, thank you.
Even me?
Yep, you're invited.
Yes. I was nervous, I'll be honest.
And then we're also opening a pub in the convention center. You may know that Seattle now has two convention centers. They function together and give us the capacity to entertain a lot of people. A few years ago, the Craft Brewers Conference was supposed to be in Seattle, but I think in 2016, but they canceled because there were more people that were craft brewers than there was capacity in Seattle. So now that's no longer the case. As of a few months ago, we opened this new one, and we'll have a Pike kiosk in that convention center.
Nice.
Man, that's exciting.
In the new one.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Both convention centers sell Pike beer.
One of the things I love, about the Marketplace Brewery is the gravity system.
Thanks.
Insight on where that came from? Because it's having, people have been suckers enough to pay me to brew beer before, and it's just all the things that can go wrong. But when you employ gravity on your side, it's just.
Well, it's only natural that humans would employ gravity to brew the beer. So people people had strong backs. They could carry sacks of malt up to the top of the tower of the brewery, dump it in the grist case, and then the rest is just automatic. It goes down through the system to become wort and then made into beer in the cellar. So most classic breweries are gravity flow for that reason. It just so happens it also treats the malt in the gentlest way. In our case, we don't carry the malt up from the cellar to the tower by hand. We have a bucket elevator. It's little handfuls of grist, ground malt, that goes up from the cellar to the very top and is dumped into a grist case, mixed with water, and then goes first to the mash tun, and from the mash tun to the kettle, and from the kettle down to the fermentation. So we don't brew beer. Every craft brewery doesn't brew beer. They brew wort, and it's not until the wort is mixed with yeast that it becomes beer. So gravity flow is a great way to brew beer.
Yeah.
The point about being gentle.
That was done long before the word sustainability became part of our vocabulary. It is the most sustainable way to brew beer as well.
Yeah, way less energy.
Yeah.
The pressure on the grain is it's an interesting point because there's a lot of breweries who are like trying to sort of create new technology to kind of mimic that idea. They don't want to put too much pressure on the grain. Freem, for instance, has a manifold underneath one of their tanks where they pull everything out because just one drainage hole kind of creates this pressure, and you can extract some muddy flavors or some tannins or things like that. It's funny that sort of the best, gentlest, most delicate way of treating grain is just gravity.
Right. Well, like handling fish, the same. You want to handle it in a gentle way. That it tastes different, and the same with wine. Saint Michel Winery, we were talking earlier about taking the grapes in the evening from Yakima Valley to Woodinville so that they were transported in the cold of the evening and arrived at the brewery in perfect condition versus harvesting them in the heat and then bringing them to the brewery in the hot weather. That's much better for the grapes and the resultant wine.
Charles, what do you do in your free time? Are you writing or anything like that?
I'm actually writing a book about the history of beer.
You don't say.
Are you sure you're qualified for that?
I'm calling it A Brief History of Beer in the Last 10,000 Years. But I'm not only interested in beer. I'm interested in gardening. I'm a gardener. I like walking and riding my bike, and try to do that as much as I can. I like reading, and I like cooking and entertaining. And last year I went to Egypt, and part of that was to research that book I mentioned. There I saw a beautiful statue at the Cairo Museum. It was a man, a gentleman, a lady copulating, and she was drinking beer from the back, doggy style, and she was drinking beer out of a straw. And that was inspirational for me. So I guess you'd call that 8,000 years of pornography.
That's the other book you're working on?
Oh, yippee-yay.
I'm not making that up.
It just goes to the point where it's like, that's what it takes to put up with men. Like there always had to be alcohol. Otherwise.
I don't know. I think it was an equal opportunity pleasure.
Also, side note,
Just had to ask, didn't you, Ron?
can Ron please write the foreword to the book? I promise he'll do a good job. I swear to God.
Yeah.
Or the afterword.
Is that a doggy style joke? Too soon, buddy. Too soon. Whatever.
Can you guys all tell we've been drinking barley wine for 2 hours?
I've not been drinking barley wine for 2 hours.
I was reticent to put that photograph in the book, by the way.
Nice.
Only because I didn't want it to be banned in Oklahoma, where I'm from.
Do you have an editor?
No, I don't at the moment.
Okay. If you hire me as your editor, it'll pretty much be like proceeding like you are right now.
You'll include it in the book?
Absolutely, I will.
You're hired.
Include anything you want.
Can't wait to
All
read
of
the
your favorite religious imagery.
Can't wait to read the footnotes.
So backtracking. We mentioned women in beer, and can you name drop your talented brewing staff right now? And can we talk about some of the other alumni that have gone through?
Yeah, well, our brewers are Leslie and Barbara, and one is the head. Leslie is our head brewster, and Barbara's our brewery manager. And some of the alumni, we've been around 34 years this year, so that's a lot of beer under the bridge, if you will. And in addition to Dick Cantwell and Fel Allen that you mentioned that wrote the barleywine book, we've had Kevin Forum. He's one of my favorites. He's the head brewer over at Flying Bike Cooperative, which is cooperatively owned, one of the few cooperatively owned breweries in America. It's in the Greenwood neighborhood of Seattle. I've had Sean from the Lazy Boy Brewery. We had Manny from Georgetown Brewery, worked at Liberty Malt Supply. We had Larry Rock. We have a collection of beer equivalent baseball cards of all the brewers.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, and our first brewer, I don't want to forget him, Jason Parker, who is the owner of Copperworks Distillery, which is our favorite distillery. I love their whiskey, and his brewery is just down the street. And I had lunch with him last week.
It's funny you mentioned that, because this was one of the questions for Hoppywood Squares. And
Pike Brewing has housed some of incredible brewers. Which of these brewers was the opening day brewer? Jason Parker, Donald Trump, or Dick Cantwell? Yeah, well, that's a good question.
thank you. It's Trump, right?
Each one just as likely as the last.
That's what he's going to say, though.
Yeah. I was there. It was incredible.
It was the perfect
It
beer.
was magnanimous.
And I made it happen.
All the brewers came to me and kissed me. Yeah, never mind. Okay, yeah. Monk's Uncle is another one of we brought it up earlier, and I'm just going to start gushing. I love that beer. It's when I remember American craft brewing, like the breweries that delved into the Belgian styles. There's a lot of ones that are near and dear to me, but there's a lot of them that I can't get anymore. So
Yeah, well, that's
I would like to thank you for continuing to make Monk's Uncle.
You're welcome. We introduced that in 2006, and prior to that, we had pretty much stuck to English-style beers, but it has endured. It's really a good seller for us, and it's a delicious beer, and I'm anything but a monk, as you might be able to tell by my discussion. But some people have suggested I'm a monk's uncle. So that's where that name came from.
That's what I was wondering, because you were saying the outside, all the devil names. I was like, man, you kind of really
well, we're more
hit the middle right there.
We're more reverent than those brewers in Belgium, and we just called it Monk's Uncle. But it has a kind of a fruity yeast character that's typical of Belgium, but the difference is we hop it at a much higher rate than they hop the Trappist beers of Belgium. And in fact, in blind tastings, we beat out Westmalle and Roquefort and some of the great Trappist beers of Belgium. With
Good flex, okay.
Yeah.
I do love that beer. Yeah. It's on the strong side. It's about, what is it, 10% alcohol, man? 9.9% alcohol. But definitely, it's like the same strength as some of the stronger Trappist beers of Belgium.
I saw it today, and it's fresh new packaging, and it was like, because that's a beer that I really love too, and I, was like early for me when I was kind of getting into stuff, going to bottle shares. Like Monk's Uncle was like this, very sort of revelatory beer in this particular style, and so to see it in its like clean, fresh, new packaging today was like really cool.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you like it, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about barley wine. Every beverage or every food has its day, and then sometimes it grows and sometimes it wanes. So I think Belgian style beers have waned, not only from American craft breweries, but even from Belgium. There are fewer now than there were 20 years ago. Yeah. But there'll be a day when people will rediscover the pleasures of those beers, because they're really great beers.
Oh yeah,
Monk's Uncle is a good example of that. But that's sure. You mentioned, gentleman here mentioned the Saison. We did a wonderful Saison. That's another great style of beer in Belgium. And of course, the sour beers. They were really popular a few years ago. I don't see them quite as much now as the few years ago, but they'll come back again. And if they, maybe I'm wrong on that, have they continued to grow sour beers?
Yeah, they're doing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you're asking me honestly, no, this is a waning. It's been a waning year.
Yeah.
We were selling sour beer like, I don't know. I'll say candy to a baby. I was gonna say something horrible.
But the same happened with wine. The same happened with craft beer. Originally, craft beer, the biggest style was pale ale. Now pale ale is not a big style. IPA became the big style.
There's quite a few breweries that don't brew pale ale.
In wine, the biggest variety was Merlot here in Washington State, and now other varieties have usurped that. So,
thanks, Paul.
beers, wines, foods. Remember, like that Zeller's Farts and Cats I mentioned earlier? That was a real popular. Leapfrog milk, remember that? Mother's milk, that was really popular, and I haven't seen that in years. It doesn't mean it's not good. It just means that people focus on something else for a certain period of time until they rediscover it.
I agree with that. And
I mean, we've been drinking beer for 8,000 years, maybe more. Probably we've been drinking it a lot longer than that, but it's been an art form at least for 8,000 years. So during that period of time, people have had an opportunity to change their preferences.
What's the chance you've got another screw-up story?
Another screw-up story? I would think we have plenty of those. Well, like a brewer mislabeling the batches of beer. How's that for a screw-up?
That's a good one.
And then
How big of a batch are we talking?
Well, we're talking about 30 barrels, 60 kegs of beer.
Okay, seems...
And 60, rather 60.
Like that would be relative, yes.
And then poor Matt has to go out in the market and explain to the Parkway Tavern and Pints and Peaks and Pints, I'm sorry, that IPA that you were selling, it's actually a barley wine.
Jeez.
What about the
And that's-
cider that we took out as beer?
The what?
The cider that we took out as beer.
Yeah,
That was
Matt and I went out to, when we first worked together, went out in the market to sell this beer we were assigned to sell. And I filled a growler with which I thought it was that beer. I didn't even taste it and poured it to a couple of customers. God, that's really good beer. What is it? That's our IPA, and turned out to be a cider.
That says more about them than it does about you.
I have a similar story. It has nothing to do with me, just that I was around when it happened. It was Barley Wine Fest, and a brewery brought us a barley wine, and everybody loved it. Wasn't a barley wine. It was just a double IPA.
Yeah.
But
Dogfish
boy,
Head
howdy
Naked?
did everyone. We're not gonna name names on this one.
Yeah, that's fair.
But it was like everyone's like, "Oh, this is the greatest barley wine." I'm like, "It's not." It was a local brewery. Let's say that. and keep it at that.
Another
Cheater, pumpkin eater. It's not okay. Like, obviously, I still harbor a little bit of resentment.
So another, I guess you call it a mistake, is I appeared at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. with 2 other brewers, and one of them was serving their barley wine, but it was brewed back east, and they didn't know they were serving that, and that brewer had never tasted that beer before. So I regarded that as not quite kosher.
Is at least a snafu.
And I'm not naming names.
I have a fuck up story. Being born Sean Jackson and not Michael Jackson, and just being able to hang out with you and kick it around Europe, because that's a fuck up on my part. I'm sorry, because I feel like it might have gone okay.
So a good story about Michael Jackson, or not such a good story, if you will, is I mentioned earlier that he died of complications from Parkinson. So he was invited to appear on the Conan O'Brien
Oh,
show.
yeah, I know this one.
And because his Parkinson affected his speech, and people presumed that Michael Jackson was, because he was a beer and single malt Scotch expert, that he was consuming large volumes of what he wrote about, that they asked him to leave the program because he was inebriated. When in fact, I never knew him to be inebriated in all the time we spent together. But that was an embarrassing story and really embarrassed him.
Yeah.
Terrible.
I remember that.
Not to speak about the disappointment of not appearing on national television on this program.
I had met him. You mentioned the Craft Brewers Conference, and I met him. He was Arlen Harris was brewing at the Rogue in Issaquah.
Yeah, I know Arlen real well.
And Michael was there, and they were doing a little video documentary, and so I got to meet Michael, and it wasn't too long after that incident happened. But I was just very that Rogue Issaquah. Like, I got to meet Charlie there and Michael. Like, what a magical place.
See, I went to Michael's funeral. Garrett Oliver was the officiant, if you will.
Yeah.
It was in London, and that was one of the nice experiences. It wasn't nice because my friend died, but to go there and honor him was a really fun experience.
I'm sure with a lot of other very impactful beer industry professionals. Yeah, goodness.
Side note, what do you think it costs to get Garrett Oliver to do that at my funeral? Like, seriously, like, I mean, not just like talented, intelligent, well-spoken, well-written, but also like handsome as hell.
Yeah, he is.
Jesus God.
He's
Garrett Oliver. Like, if there's a dollar figure, let me know what it is, and I'll start saving my nickels.
Well, Garrett Oliver is one of the few African-American brewers and the most famous African-American brewer in America. And he grew up in what they call Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in New York. And he explained to me that now he goes to Bedford-Stuyvesant and every restaurant has pâté de foie gras. So things have changed.
Yeah.
Did you have a question? I'm so sorry.
Nope. Go for
I was
it.
just going to say, I think we're almost out of time, right, Doug? Yeah. So I was just going to say thank you.
Yeah.
Like, this is, we ran out of time quicker than I thought, even though
This
it's
has
been
been
2
a
hours.
lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm really honored.
Yeah, I doubt I've ever learned so much in 2 hours.
Right.
Yes, seriously, Charles.
I love
think we're
Tacoma. I love the Parkway Tavern. I like Peaks and Pints.
Thanks, Charles.
And so it's really a pleasure to speak to you.
I think we're retiring after this.
Yeah,
really.
like, I don't think it's a good idea to continue this.
Yeah, okay. There you go.
No, we're not going to farve this. You know what I mean? Look, I don't know. Should we play another season? We're on top. Just pull the cord.
All right, Grit and Grainers. Email us at cheers@gritandgrainpodcast.com with your comments, opinions, and clever Tacoma Rainier events now that Casey Catherwood has retired.
Rip. That's such a bummer.
It is such a bummer. So maybe bring up some ideas like turn back the clock night with Gillette straight razor giveaways, kissing cousins night, and maybe Scott's turf builder dandelion seed night. We read and drink everything we receive, and we try to respond as quickly as we can on air. If not, what? If you can you can subscribe to Grit and Grain on Amazon, Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. And please leave us a review. Also, check us out at Channel 253 and gritandgrainpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for episode notes, beer news, and Earth Day events. Because in this time of great transition, as the earth winces and nations sweat and we reproduce and consume and use it up and move on to find more, it reminds us of that line from Agent Smith in the first Matrix movie, where he stares at Morpheus and speaks how every mammal on earth instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment. But you humans do not. You move to an area and you multiply until every natural resource is consumed. And then Morpheus gets all huffy and righteous and goes out to inspire Neo to prove how we're also full of beauty and fire and life. And Neo makes it all better by saving humankind with his Neosporin, and we can go buy the mediocre soundtrack. If this podcast is not what you expect, please alter your expectations. They might be giants. They might not. Who knows? But they're probably wearing lifts. No such thing as a bad time to visit Tacoma. No such thing as too much barley wine. Yeah! Tune in next Friday for more sweet chatter. Cheers. Woo. Cheers.
They might be giants. They might not. Oh, shit. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us at Grit and Grain Podcast wherever you get your social media and catch new episodes every Friday. Cheers.
Good up.
This is Channel 253.